Hey, welcome. So today we're diving into a really provocative idea from our source material, this concept of a strategic cancer diet. It's a theory that's built on a pretty radical premise that what we eat isn't just passive fuel, but it could be an active tool in the fight against cancer. Let's get right into it.
And here it is, the central claim from the source, right up front. The idea here is that food is never neutral in this fight. It's either helping your body or it could be helping the cancer. This one statement is really the foundation for this entire strategy we're going to unpack today.
Now that opening statement is incredibly bold, right? The source material basically argues that while a lot of conventional advice might downplay diet, it could actually be a critical, overlooked piece of the puzzle. The whole premise is that the standard advice just might not be enough, and a much more targeted approach is needed.
Okay, and before we go a single step further, this is the first and most critical point the source makes. This explainer is for your information only. It's designed to help you do your own research and have a more informed conversation with your doctor or medical team. It is absolutely not medical advice.
So to even understand the proposed solution, the source says we first have to understand the opponent. And cancer isn't framed as just some single brute force enemy. No, it's seen as a complex and highly adaptive adversary. And that's exactly why a more creative strategy might be called for.
The first key concept you have to wrap your head around is that cancer is heterogeneous. I mean, the word literally comes from the Greek for different kind. It means cancer isn't one single disease. It's a whole bunch of different diseases with different origins and behaviors. You can even have different types of cells inside one single tumor. This is so important because it means a one-size-fits-all approach is probably not going to work. Okay. This slide is like the know your enemy profile. The source describes cancer cells as sick cells, which is interesting. It means they're actually kind of fragile, living on the edge, and that creates vulnerabilities. And look at these traits. Each one is a potential target, right? It can dodge our immune system. It loves areas with low oxygen. It even tries to block vitamin D to help itself survive. Every single one of these traits is a potential weakness we might be able to exploit. And that brings us to the absolute core of this strategy. If cancer cells need fuel to grow, and they do, then one of their biggest weak spots has to be their fuel supply. So the big question this source poses is this: what does cancer eat? And can we cut off its food supply?
Well, the number one item on the menu, according to the source, is glucose, sugar. The idea is that the vast majority of cancer cells are just incredibly dependent on glucose to function. And that right there, that suggests a pretty clear potential dietary strategy, doesn't it?
But of course, it's not that simple. Nothing ever is. The source is really quick to point out that the especially aggressive, fast-growing cancers, they have a second favorite food, an amino acid called glutamine. So right away you see the problem, right? Just cutting out sugar might not be the whole story.
So that leads to a pretty obvious question, right? What happens if you do successfully cut off a cancer cell's favorite food? Does it just roll over and die? Well, according to our source, that's when cancer shows you how smart it is, because it is designed to survive.
And this slide? Wow! This really shows you the heart of the problem. It turns out cancer isn't a picky eater. It has this entire menu it can choose from. You take away the glucose, and it can learn to burn fats. Or it can switch to specific amino acids, these BCAAs. And get this, the source even says that some very advanced cancers can learn to use ketones for fuel, which is the very thing your body makes on many low-carb diets.
So, how do you fight an enemy that can eat almost anything? Well, the proposed solution is actually built around that very problem. If cancer can adapt to any single change you make to your diet, then the strategy has to be to never let it get comfortable. And that is the whole idea behind the rotational diet.
The logic here is actually pretty brilliant in its simplicity. Think of it like constantly changing the locks on a door. You start by targeting one fuel source, let's say glucose, for a few days. But right when the cancer cells are starting to figure out how to pick that lock, boom, you switch the diet to target a totally different fuel, like glutamine. The goal is to keep it constantly guessing, always off balance.
And here are some concrete examples of what that might look like, taken from the source. For something like a melanoma, which might use both glucose and glutamine, the idea is to rotate between an anti-glucose diet and an anti-glutamine diet. For certain prostate cancers that can use fats or lipids, you might do a short anti-glucose phase and then switch to an anti-lipid phase. You see? The key is tailoring the rotation to the specific cancer's likely fuel source.
Now, this is an absolutely crucial point, and the source is super clear about it. This is proposed as a complementary strategy. It's something to be used alongside, not instead of, conventional treatments like chemo and radiation. I can't say it enough. All of this is meant to be discussed with a medical professional.
But the strategy doesn't just stop with diet. The source argues you need to think of it more like a multi-front attack. The rotational diet is the foundation, sure, but it should be reinforced with other strategies to create an environment that's just generally hostile to cancer.
Okay, first up, vitamin D. Remember how we said cancer tries to block those vitamin D receptors? Well, the source suggests aiming for a much higher blood level, around 90 nanograms per milliliter. The thinking is you want to overwhelm that blocking mechanism and give your immune system all the support it needs.
Next up, we've got intermittent fasting, which the source recommends as just a daily standard. The logic is simple. By eating only 1 or 2 meals a day, you're limiting the window of time that fuel and resources are floating around your body for cancer cells to potentially use.
And then, for an even bigger impact, the source also suggests longer fasts. We're talking 48 to 72 hours, or maybe even more. But, and this is key, the recommendation is to do it erratically, maybe once every few weeks. Why? Same logic as the diet. You don't want the cancer adapting to a predictable pattern.
So, when you put all these pieces together, you get this 4-pronged attack. You've got the rotational diet, combined with both daily intermittent fasting and occasional prolonged fasts. Then you add regular exercise to get more oxygen into your body, and sun exposure to boost vitamin D and support your cellular power plants, the mitochondria.
So really, everything we've talked about, it all boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. The strategy has to mirror the opponent. Because cancer is constantly shifting, adapting, and trying to survive, any effective strategy against it has to be just as dynamic.
And that really leaves us with one final question to think about. A question that gets to the very heart of this entire approach. If the opponent we're facing is relentlessly adaptive and never, ever stays the same, does a static, unchanging battle plan really make any sense?